Okay, hello everybody. I'm Supreet and here to present our work on automated server hopping in cloud spot markets. This is joint work with my advisor David Irwin. Okay, let's get started. So this work relates to the emerging area of transient servers, which are becoming ubiquitous in the cloud. So I like this definition from an early work in NSTA which states that these are the servers that may terminate anytime after an advanced warning period. These are distinct from the SLAs we've seen in the past in that their preemption comes with premonition. While it may seem that their sole purpose is to just torment the applications, their origins could be traced back to the dismal levels of utilization in cloud data centers and the effort on the part of cloud providers to put these idle resources to some use. Obviously, all of the big three providers have responded to this dynamic. Amazon's spot instances, Google's preemptible VMs, and Microsoft's resource harvesting data centers are all examples of this. While all these provide interesting systems research challenges, our work here is focused on Amazon spot markets. Okay, so we'll look at them briefly before we jump into the problem. Okay, in a nutshell, users bid for VMs in a second price auction. EC2 then continually evaluates the supply-demand dynamic to price the servers in real time. And if user's bid is above the spot price, they're allocated a server. And when the spot price goes above user's bid, Amazon reserves the right to revoke the server with 2-minute warning. EC2 markets have a massive scale and complexity. And that's because Amazon prices each VM housed in each data center of each region separately. So there are a total of about 7,600 worldwide spot markets. To put that in some perspective, the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ together have less than 6,000 publicly traded stocks. So why are folks using this seemingly complex offering? Because they're very cheap. Okay, so what I have here is the price trace of an M4 large VM captured over a 4-month window. We have time on the x-axis and price along the y-axis. The green line here indicates the instantaneous price and the red dotted lines indicate the two example bid levels. The two defining characteristics of this trace are the low average price levels interspersed with unexpected spikes. When a spike crosses a red line, it results in a revocation. Since applications and system frameworks don't perform well when the underlying VMs are frequently revoked, many researchers and startups are actively working to address this problem. So the general approach is to treat revocations as failures and then use fault tolerance mechanisms, particularly checkpointing, to reduce their impact. While the list of prior work here is not exhaustive, it does give a sense of how actively people are working on these problems. So I have some sampling from the last 3 years. Okay, so put in another way, employing fault tolerance is like buying insurance. Users pay upfront premiums and expect a payout later. The premium is the overhead of fault tolerance, and the payout is the ability to limit an application's loss upon a VM revocation. In this work, however, we make an argument that in a marketplace this dynamic, focusing exclusively on revocation risks results in many missed opportunities. And it implicitly exposes applications to what we call the price risk. That is a risk that a VM's price will increase relative to others. To expand on that, let's say there are two VM types A and B, either of which could be used for an application, and that neither of the markets experience any revocation at the user's bid level. So if we were to focus exclusively on the revocation risk, the application would choose one of these VMs and run to completion. However, if you're aware of the price risk, we would know when our market is not the best and thus make a move, right? Ending up with a better price trace that looks like this. Okay, so this brings us to the gist of what we're trying to investigate in this paper. We address two critical questions in our work. First, if we optimize for price risk, what effect does it have on applications' performance? And more importantly, the revocation risk. And second, how do we enable flexible cloud applications to mitigate this price risk in a transparent way? Towards addressing these problems, we propose a technique called automated server hopping. and design HotSpot, which is a system that implements automated server hopping on EC2. So in the next few slides, I'll describe the design aspects and try to answer these two questions. So the core insight of automated server hopping is best reflected in what Jack Welch had said years earlier: change before you have to. It's the abstraction of a resource container that automatically hops spot VMs by selecting and self-migrating as market conditions change. Okay, it's demonstrated in this figure where a container migrates from market A to market B when it no longer is the best, resulting in a price trace that looks better than any in the primary market, right, shown below. Okay, so the first thing is to validate if server hopping does indeed mitigate the price risk in real markets. To do that, we take a long-running job which runs for 30 days and use it with server hopping and run it with server hopping. The graph here shows the cost savings along the y-axis and the different zones of the US East 1 along the x-axis. We see that by simply hopping, as opposed to staying put, we could save anywhere from 15 to 65%. Okay, so I want to reiterate that these are not the savings from the price difference between the spot and the on-demand. This is on top of that, and this is what we're leaving on the table if we ignore the price risk. Okay, so now that we know server hopping does increase cost efficiency, the imminent question is, does it affect applications performance? How about revocation risk? Okay, so to do that, we analyze price traces from the spot market to understand the market dynamics. The first insight is that there is a relationship between a VM's instantaneous revocation risk, that is, if the VM is going to be revoked in the next moment, and its current spot price discount. This relationship derives from the way Amazon operates its market. Say you have a highly discounted server, right? It reflects that there is more supply than demand. So for a revocation to occur in a highly discounted market, the supply-demand dynamic has to drastically change suddenly, right? Possible, but not likely. So this insight is revealed in the CDF graph that plots revocation rate along the y-axis and the spot to on-demand price ratio along the x-axis. So a red dot here indicates the revocation rate when the price ratio was at or below that level. So as we can see, for most highly discounted servers, the risk of being revoked immediately is really low. And this makes a good case for hopping servers. The second insight concerns performance. Okay, so we all know that for on-demand VMs, all the members in a given family have the same cost efficiency, right? So like if you get an M4 large, you pay 10 cents an hour. M4 2x large, you pay 20 cents, 4x large, 40 cents, and so on. However, this doesn't hold good in spot markets. Okay, so the graph here shows the cost efficiency, which is measured in terms of price per ECU hour on the y-axis and the different members of the M4 family along the x-axis for different regions. So what this means is that if you're looking for the most cost-efficient server, you could end up with either a high-capacity server, which is more performant, or a low-capacity server, which is going to be less performant. So we address this concern in our design to make sure that we do not migrate to a server that has lower capacity than what it's required. Okay, so in summary, server hopping definitely lowers the revocation risk without necessarily degrading performance. Okay, so with that we come to the core of the server hopping logic, where we determine when and where to hop. Okay, I've tried to keep this part more intuitive, and we have more rigorous treatment of this in the paper. So the goal of our migration policy is to maintain this invariant, that we always run in a VM that gives the best cost efficiency measured in terms of dollars per utilized resource without hindering the application's performance. In order to maintain this invariant, the policy triggers a migration check whenever two things happen: either the VM's utilization changes or some changes happen in the market. Okay, however, the decision on whether or not to migrate is based on the subsequent cost benefit analysis, where we go through all the applicable markets and compute the cost of migration and the expected savings. The migration cost comes from two components. One, double paying for the VM during the migration, uh, and second, vacating early from the current VM before the end of the current billing period. Right. So a surprising announcement from Amazon just 2 days back that it's moving away from per hour billing model to per second billing. That essentially nullifies the second component. So the migration cost is lesser now. It just depends on application's footprint and how long does it take to transfer its state to the target VM. Okay, so on the other hand, the benefit of migration is the gain in the efficiency for the duration that we expect to stay on the VM, right? Empirically, we have seen the average time for the cheapest VM in a zone to change about 1.1 hours. All right. So as we can see, the benefit is primarily a function of the market characteristics. Similar cost benefit trade-offs exist in many scenarios, like whether or not to refinance your home or rebalance your stock portfolio, etc. Again, I presented an oversimplified formulation here. I'm sure you'll find the treatment in the paper more satisfying. Okay, so having covered all the components, we're ready to look at HotSpot, which implements server hopping on EC2. Okay, at its core, it's a Linux container and an accompanying controller daemon that manages the VM hopping for this container. Okay, its basic control loop is like 1, 2, 3. First, it monitors the spot prices and the VM utilization. Second, it feeds this information to the cost benefit analysis to determine when and where to migrate. And finally, if a migration decision is triggered, it acquires a new VM, transparently migrates the Linux container along with its disk and the network, and then terminates the current VM. Okay, so we have a fully functional prototype on GitHub, and I request you to please give it a try. Okay, that brings us to evaluation. The goal is straightforward here. We want to compare the cost performance and the revocation risk of running a batch application using three techniques. First, simply using a vanilla spot VM with no protections. Second, using spot VM with optimal fault tolerance. And third, using spot VM with server hopping, which is our method. And we're interested in answering two questions. Okay, first, when the application and the market characteristics change, how do each of these methods respond to that? And second, how do these methods perform in the real market for like real jobs? For the former, we use a prototype of Hotspot and Spoton, but control for the application in the market using emulators. And for the latter, we simulated running Google cluster traces on EC2 spot markets using price traces from March to May of this year. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to share only one result. So this is the Google cluster trace on spot market. Okay, for this experiment, we randomly choose 1,000 jobs from Google cluster traces that have a runtime of greater than 24 hours. So these the simulator initially starts them off on a VM that is specified by the user in the trace, and then let the technique determine where to continue the execution. The first graph here shows the techniques on the x-axis and the average cost on the y-axis. The cost is normalized to running it on demand. The first thing we see is that all three approaches have significantly lower cost than using on-demand VMs, right? Which is in line with what we expect. However, Hotspot is able to further reduce the cost 30 to 50% compared to other methods. Next, we look at the impact on the running time, right? The performance. While none of the methods really improve the runtime compared to running it on demand, the increase is not very significant, right? So if we zoom in on the top part of it, we see that Hotspot's overhead is just about 0.5%, as opposed to Spot Fleet's, which is more than 5%. So to understand the cost and runtime behavior better, we look under the hood in this third graph. Okay, so the y-axis here chronicles the system events that are observed. These are revocations, checkpoints, and migrations. Okay, two things here. First, it's interesting to see the the revocation rates are so low that it's really hard to make out in the graph. Okay. Second, about the higher bars here. So since we conducted the experiments when EC2 billing model was per hour, the optimal checkpointing uh, for spot on was to checkpoint at the hourly boundaries, which resulted in a checkpointing rate of nearly like 1 per hour, right? Whereas HotSpot, which responds to the market conditions, migrated only 6 times a day. Okay, so in summary, even in the current market conditions with low prices and low revocation rates, server hopping outperforms other approaches to managing spot VMs. Our prototype experiments cover many other interesting what if scenarios, like what would happen if the revocation rates were to become worse and increase, or if jobs become bigger with higher memory footprint. Okay, so with that, let me conclude by summarizing our work. Transit servers and spot markets are an emerging area and offer many opportunities for cost saving. Through our market analysis, we first established that the price risk is significant in the current spot markets and that mitigating price risk also reduces revocations. To enable cloud applications to transparently manage the price risk, we proposed the technique of automated server hopping and then design and implement it in a prototype called HotSpot for EC2. And our evaluations show 30 to 50% cost reduction compared to other techniques. And not only that, it also leads to a lower overhead, lower revocations, and more determinism. With that, I thank you for your patience and we'll be happy to discuss any thoughts and questions you have.